I had been asked by a TV company to help them do the research on their TV series, which was set in modern day Shanghai. I got very interested in the city and they wanted some work on the historical background. So I started to read about the 1920s and 1930s, which wasn't very helpful for them, but I got kind of seduced by that and drawn into that tumultuous city of the 20s and 30s, sort of golden age of that period. As I read those stories about old Shanghai, I was getting frustrated by all the good bits that were being left out of the TV series, and also I was by that stage working on a film that was set here as well, a film set in the 1940s. And because basically I'm a writer at heart, I thought I want to tell my own story about this city. I must have read 30 or 40 books, and I looked at every map going that I could find for the city, and started to try and dream up a story and characters to display that. As a writer in general, that can be anything at all, but I like to, for this series, I was looking particularly at the memoirs of Westerners, people like Pearl Buck, who had grown up. She was a classic Western child growing up in China, that she spoke Chinese perfectly, and she thought herself almost as more Chinese than English, which became a big thing for Ruby. And then I read everything going, obscure memoirs of riverboat captains, things like that. I made a particular attempt to find every map of the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, and really try to imagine myself onto the streets of that world. I was drawn to the fact that this was a city packed with people, obviously, but with about 50 or 100 different nations crammed together into this small space. And I thought, what's that going to be like? How are those people going to interact? And particularly knowing that outside the city things were really chaotic, there was civil war going on. So I wanted to take almost the most intensely dangerous setting I could and then put a child into it. Ruby's parents want to bring her up as if she's in England, nice and safe, but she's in a dangerous city, and to see what happened to her. So it's really hard to get second books to be strong and to work well, and it's really hard to plot trilogies, so I like to create something like this, which gives us a sense of how the character and the story is going to flow. And in this you can see the entire book spread out across the whole of this sheet, and that helped me to make the second book work. I think the hardest thing was that finding who the character was going to be. This was a book that started with the setting, and I needed to find what the story would be and who that central character was going to be. For a long time he was a boy, and the story didn't seem to work, and I kept handing him versions of the script of the story, and my editor would say, I still don't know who your lead character is, and I got very frustrated. And then one day I woke up and realised that he should be a she. It needed to be a girl, and I gave her a name. That name was Ruby, and suddenly it worked immediately, that story, for some reason. Ultimately, I'm really happy with the first chapter because I just know how difficult that was to make, and because I literally moved paragraphs around until they fell into place. And I am really pleased with the second book because I get to see this river journey, and I'd always wanted to write a mighty river journey, and probably there's no river more impressive to travel. I would start with knowing who that central character was, if by some magic I could do that, because I would save about 4 years of my life. And I would also like probably the publishers to come out with me to schools and see that in fact children want rich and complex stories, because then it wouldn't have been so hard to sell it to them in the first place. So, as I said, some bits of her come from memoirs I read. I read almost every memoir I could find of children, Western children growing up in Shanghai in the 10s and 20s. And then I borrowed bits from friends. There's one particular friend who I just kept in mind the whole time because she really had that sense of the character. And if you know who the person is, the story tends to keep moving. And then there's probably little bits of me, because we always do that as authors. Lao Jin was one of my favourite characters. He kind of takes me back to my childhood when I'd be watching Eastern set things on television. There was often a kind of wise, strange person who would come into the story and help the central characters to do whatever they needed to do. So I wanted him to be strong and resourceful and a bit strange and a bit elusive. So it was lovely to see how people had responded to his character. It really made me feel good. That was because back in the 80s, the first thing I studied at university was Chinese, and I was all set to go to China, and then I wasn't very well for quite a long time and I never went. And then for one reason or another I never got here to Shanghai. So when I started the third book, I thought I would imagine how my life might have been if I had gone. And it was just a device to make a huge chunk of time as well, to really open the story up and show Ruby as an old woman. My Chinese is terrible now, because it was a long time ago I was learning it, and also because for my new book, which is set in Japan, I am doing intensive Japanese courses, and as a 53-year-old man it turns out to be quite tough. So now I am working on this book set in Japan. It's set around the Fukushima exclusion zone, where many thousands of people have been forced to leave their houses by the tsunami wave and the radiation disaster. And I just want to know what it's like to live on the edge of that. How do you start to build your life again? What are the things you can do that make your life work? So I'm travelling there once a year at the moment to talk to people in and around the zone.